So we are jumping back in to philosophy of religion. So just as a recap, last time we went over Anselm and Aquinas, and just quick recap of Anselm. He made the famous ontological argument. So, put simply, his argument was that God is that than which nothing greater can be thought. And so, if you think of the greatest thing ever, that is God. And so, if you're able to think of it, then God exists in your understanding. And then Anselm makes the claim that existence in reality is more perfect than existence in understanding. And so, if God exists in your understanding as the greatest thing ever, then he must exist in reality as the greatest thing ever. So, that's just a quick summary of Anselm. And then Aquinas gives 5 arguments for the existence of God. And they all, in some way, say a similar thing. The main thing that he's proving is God as first cause. So God must exist because there had to have been a first mover. Aristotle calls this the unmoved mover. And as we learned, Aquinas is trying to synthesize Christian doctrine and Aristotelian philosophy. And so that's why we have this argument for the unmoved mover. But for Aquinas, this unmoved mover is the Christian God. For Aristotle, that is not actually the case. But since Aquinas is synthesizing, bringing those two philosophies together, for him, the unmoved mover is the Christian God. So those were just two different formulations of arguments for the existence of God. And as I said, both of those were from the medieval period. So today we're moving forward in time, and we're moving to the modern period, modern and contemporary. But I just realized that I just jumped right in, but I didn't even say what's up. So I hope everyone is doing well. I hope classes and everything are going good. And don't forget that if you ever need anything, you can just reach out. Email is great. And if you ever need help with the material, hit me up and we can do that. Okay. I'm sorry I was so rude to just jump into the material. So, back to what we're doing. Let me see if there's anything else I should say to you. Oh, as I'm recording this right now, I haven't graded the critical summaries, but I'm going to do that tomorrow, which will be the day that you're watching this. So, you should get a grade by the end of the week. Yeah. Oh, and I think, is Labor Day this weekend? I think it is. Yeah, the bad part about just uploading lectures is I can't be like, what are you doing for the weekend? Or, I hope you have a good Labor Day. Yes, it is this weekend, this coming Monday. So I hope that you have fun and enjoy not having some classes. Obviously, it won't affect ours, but for your others, that should be great. A day off. Okay. Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about 2 more philosophers, William Paley and Roger White. And William Paley is from kind of towards the end of the modern period of philosophy, which, if you recall, that's like from the 16th century through the 19th century. So William Paley was born in 1743 and died in 1805, and his paper that we're reading is from 1802. So after the Enlightenment, so it's kind of a response to that in some ways. Yeah, so we'll just jump in. So his big thing, which I mentioned briefly in our last lecture. Also, by the way, I'm going to try and keep this lecture shorter because I couldn't get the other one uploaded at a reasonable time. So I feel bad like having you watch 2 full ones when you couldn't watch the first one at the right time. So yeah, by the way, I apologize for not having that lecture up. I don't really know what happened with Blackboard, but it took like all night to upload, and then it was just a black screen that uploaded. So I don't know, but I guess we'll move to YouTube for the time being. What was I saying about that? Oh, I'm going to try and keep this shorter because, yeah. So, as I mentioned, this is the famous watchmaker argument. So, one thing about William Paley that I read up on him just to make sure, I knew a little background of who we're talking about. One thing that is kind of funny about him is that he's known for not having much original work. So he was very smart and he wrote great textbooks because he was good at explaining what other people had already said. So he was very good at explaining and formulating arguments, but most of what he wrote was not original to him. He kind of plagiarized in some sense. So that was just kind of funny to me that when reading about him, that's something that's famous about him. So this watchmaker argument was not originally his. In some way, this formulation of it is his, but like the concept was not original to him. It dates back to a while ago. Even Rene Descartes, who we'll talk about eventually, he referenced like a watch as an analogy for intelligent design. So this isn't the first time this argument was ever made, but it's the most famous version because it's really well laid out. So Paley was doing what Paley does best, formulating other people's ideas. So it starts with him supposing that he's walking across a heath, which I'm curious to know if anybody knew what that word meant, because I would not have known what a heath was without looking it up. But it's just an area of uncultivated land, just big open area. So, I don't know, you could imagine a desert or something. So he's walking through a desert, suppose, and he hits like a rock. And he wonders, where did that come from? And basically it was just that it was just there. Like, it's part of the earth. It just, nothing special about it. It's just a rock. It was just there. And then he says, suppose that I was walking on a desert and I look down and I see a watch. That initial thought is much different than the thought he had when stumbling upon a rock. The rock is, it's a rock, move on. The watch response is, I wonder where this came from, or I wonder who made this. It's never, oh yeah, this just came to be, or this just popped into existence. It would be absurd to think, oh, the watch has always been here, because it was so intentionally designed and thought out and created. So obviously you probably see where he's going, but his big inference that he would make in this imaginary story is that the watch had a maker. It had a creator. So obviously he's going to take that analogy and look at the things around us and say these things must have had a creator. So he goes on to give really great detail, which I think is partly why this is the most famous formulation of this argument, because he's really specific and really builds it up, like makes it sound more compelling than it otherwise might. He says, we see a cylindrical box containing a coiled elastic spring, which, by its endeavor to relax itself, turns around the box. Anyways, very specific and almost poetic. And whenever you present information in this way, it can be very compelling. So, his conclusion to this first little part of his argument is that the mechanism, or the watch, being observed, is that the watch must have had a maker. That it must have existed at some time, at some place or another, and somebody designed its use, constructed it. So then he goes through a few almost like answers to objections. So he starts, number one is that the big idea is that it makes no difference if we never see the watchmaker or the watch being made. So an objection to his argument could be somebody saying, that could be the case for a watch, but in real life, if you're suggesting this is about God, we don't see God ever. And so we don't have any reason to think there's a watchmaker a creator of the universe, because we've never seen the creator of the universe. And he basically says that's nonsense, because whenever you see a watch, you don't have to see the watchmaker to know that that the watch was made by a watchmaker. So he's kind of just debunking little objections through this little part. So then his second big point is that it's not necessary that a machine be perfect in order to show that it was made. So the watch doesn't need to be working perfectly in order for you to assume that there was a maker. Because somebody could look at the world and be like, there's messed up things that happen. There are things that are irregular, that don't actually happen according to what seems like a design. And you would say, even if the watch was working irregularly, it wouldn't make a difference. You would still make the same conclusion that somebody made the watch. Then you get to the third point, which is it doesn't bring uncertainty into the argument if there were a few parts of the watch that we could not or had not discovered. So if there were pieces in the watch that we haven't seen yet, it doesn't make any difference to there being a watchmaker. So that would be like if somebody was looking at the universe and was like, there's so much that we don't know. So how can you make an argument that you know who created the world? Because the ocean is like, 90% undiscovered. And he would say that makes no difference because we still look around and see evidence of a creator. So basically these points are, he supposes somebody says, what if this? And then he says, that doesn't matter, or that doesn't make a difference. So then you get to the fourth little part, and he says, once again, it doesn't bring uncertainty, that the watch might have contained some internal configuration. So some people might say that like the universe is acting according to its own laws, and so wouldn't that mean that somebody didn't have to create it? And he would say, also not true, because a watch acts according to its own configuration, but it's still evident that somebody made the watch. And then the textbook skips a few of his little points, probably because they're not that important, and we move to point 7, which is that it doesn't bring any uncertainty if the watch acts according to natural laws, because it still needed to be created. So that point before was some internal configuration, and this next point is a little bit broader, specifically about natural laws. So if the watch acts according to the laws of its metallic nature, that still doesn't make a difference, because there still has to be an original agent that created the watch. If it sounds like I'm repeating myself, I kind of am, because all the answers to these are very similar. Then you get to the 8th point, which is that even if the observer doesn't know much, he knows enough for the argument. He doesn't need to know everything. So he supposes that somebody would say, you don't know anything about this watch, or someone could keep bringing up stuff like, what about this? What about this? And Paley makes the argument that it doesn't really matter how many more things somebody can bring up, because the observer has enough evidence to make the claim that there's a watchmaker or a designer of the universe. So even if the observer of the world doesn't know every single thing about the world, he still knows enough to know that it was created. So it's a very simple argument. Basically, the world looks like it's been designed, so there's an intelligent designer. Very simple. Then you get to chapter 2. So we just went through chapter 1 of Paley's argument from design, and now we're on to chapter 2. Let's see. So then he suggests, anticipating that someone else would suggest this, suppose the watch had the unexpected property of producing another watch like itself. So you look at a watch, and that watch has the capability of producing another watch, and then another, and another. So that's his starting place, and he's about to debunk or refute all of the objections against that. So his first point is that the first effect would be more admiration for the original maker. So, meaning that the first effect of learning of this new discovery that this watch creates more watches should be adoration or admiration of the original maker. So if a watch is capable of making another watch, then that first watch must have been really, really special and uniquely designed. So the way that you would see the analogy of this is like humans or other living things reproduce. And so if we're just capable of reproducing, then why does there need to be a maker? Because we're making. And he would say that the fact that living things are capable of reproduction just shows how awesome the original designer and creator was. Then he goes to the next point that this watch creating another watch doesn't make the first watch the cause. It's just there still had to be an original cause. It's just reproducing, replicating what's already there. But it's not causing it. And then he goes to the third point, which is that basically there can't be this design without the designer. So his conclusion for this third point is the same conclusion as the whole argument. Then he moves on to this fourth point, which is that it brings no uncertainty that the watch had been produced from another, and so on indefinitely. So basically he supposes that someone would say, what if watches just kept making watches? So this watch was made by this watch, which was made by this watch, which was made by this watch, and so on into infinity regression. So if you remember talking about the infinite regress, this is kind of the same thing happening. So he argues that going back infinitely does not negate the fact that design must have had a designer. So he's still using the same conclusion that he started with to refute these little pieces. Like somebody brings something up and he says, basically, if there was a design, it had to have a designer. He's basically saying the same thing for each little rebuttal. All right. So the first chapter shows that the watch must have had an author of its construction, and then the second chapter presents us with a new discovery that the watch is capable of producing another watch in a system of organization. And this discovery, he says, should only increase our admiration for the original maker or creator or designer. So, a lot of words to kind of say the same thing. Then you get to chapter 3, which is the application of this argument that he's making. So he supposes that you're looking at the sky, sky, I don't know what, universe, whatever, with your eye through a telescope. So he basically says both of those things, both the telescope and your eye, are specially designed to see the right refraction of light and convex things and all of the science that I've learned at one point and totally forgot. So if you look through a telescope, you obviously think, oh, like this telescope was created to see things up close. So shouldn't you look at the eye and say a similar thing like, oh, this eye was created to specifically see in this way or whatever. So it's just another formulation of the same argument. So basically, every observation of the watch analogy can be applied to the eye. So he's going from this analogy of the watch to real life, look at the eye. Because the eye shows that there had to have been design here. And then he kind of explains for a minute that perfection and existence are not the same thing. And so whenever he argues for the existence of God through this design argument, it's not the same thing as arguing for the perfection of that God. So this argument from design doesn't tell us much about the intelligent designer. Mostly just shows us or demonstrates in some way that God exists, and then that's kind of where it ends. You have to do more work to get to a perfect God being the creator. So he ends by just saying that when the argument respects his attributes, they are of weight, but are then to be taken in conjunction with the unexceptionable evidences which we possess of skill, power, and benevolence displayed in other instances. So this argument from design doesn't prove a perfect God, but he says, take this argument in conjunction with other evidences that we see of skill, power, and benevolence of this intelligent designer. Combine those, and now you get God. is kind of what he's going at. So, there's a couple of ways you can read Paley's argument. The first is that you could just say this is a version of the God of the gaps problem that we discussed, where you just kind of place God where you don't have more information. Because he's kind of just like, it looks like it's designed. I guess it's God, or whatever. I mean, obviously he has more confidence and more weight to that, but that's how you could read it, is almost like a lazy explanation. Or you could read this as an inference to the best explanation, which is basically when you're presented with evidence and the best explanation seems to be this one thing. Among a bunch of other evidences, you look and you say, no, not that, not that. This seems to be the best explanation. So we're going to use an inference and conclude in this way. So an example of an inference to the best explanation would be if I am walking to the grocery store and I hear someone say, "There's a man in a red hat that just stole peanut butter." And then I'm walking and then I see a man walking by me out of the grocery store with a red hat holding peanut butter. That would be a really reasonable conclusion to make, that that's the guy they were just talking about. So it's not, an inference to the best explanation isn't just like a guess or anything like that. Like, there's actually evidence around that makes it a valid option. So you can read this in that light or in the other light. Or somewhere in the middle if you want. But one thing to think about is that this argument has been refuted quite a few times. Richard Dawkins wrote about this. So if you are interested in this topic for your paper, Richard Dawkins wrote The Blind Watchmaker, which is an attempt to refute this argument. And so I would recommend reading that. And so if you're in favor of the watchmaker argument, then you should go read Richard Dawkins' paper and then respond to that objection, defending the watchmaker argument. If you don't like the watchmaker argument, then you should read Richard Dawkins' paper and support him. Or that's just a suggestion. That's not like what you have to do. Yeah, so I would read this note too in your book, and if you're interested in this type of thing. Also, just tip in general, read the notes in your book, because you can either see options for papers, or you could read the test your understanding little portion, and you could read those and then write your critical summary influenced by one of those questions. So, for example, one of the questions on here is, Paley argues that living things are like watches in one respect. Both exhibit contrivance or design. Say what this means. So you could just take that and write your critical summary about it. Expand a little bit, but those are all good ideas. So, anyways, that is Paley's big watchmaker argument. That is a perfect example of an argument for the existence of God from design. And that was from the modern era, from around the Enlightenment. Now, we're going to fast forward a couple like 150 years or so, to this contemporary philosopher that's still alive. So, we've been reading people that are all dead, but this guy's still alive. Roger White, he is a professor at MIT. One thing that was interesting, I forgot to say about William Paley, was that he was a priest. So it was interesting. Anglican, I believe. So, Roger White, he focuses mostly on epistemology and the philosophy of science. So philosophy of religion isn't necessarily his wheelhouse, but obviously these disciplines overlap in a lot of ways. So, he writes about this more recent argument from cosmological fine-tuning. And I discussed this a little bit in the last lecture, but the basis of the argument is that our universe is fine-tuned for life. That if the oxygen levels were anything else, or if the temperature was anything else, or if the firewater. If the water was it, I don't know, anything else, life could not exist. So we live in a very specific environment for life, and it's cool if you believe in aliens and stuff, but like, it doesn't seem that there is much life. We don't know much, but from our perspective as humans, it doesn't seem like there's much life elsewhere, And so it is very special and unique that there is life here. It seems, obviously, there could be aliens, I don't know. There could be tons of other worlds, who knows. But regardless, our universe is specifically fine-tuned for life, because if anything else was different, life could not exist. So, in this paper from Roger White, he basically acknowledges that this argument is an argument that's an inference to the best explanation. So it's not like a knockdown argument. It's not something that is irrefutable. It's just, this is really, really what it seems to be. This is what really, really seems to be the case. And that sounds like a weak argument, but the more you look at philosophy and epistemology and everything, this is something done a lot, where you just look at, okay, we don't have a great answer for this, but this is really what it seems to be. I took a class on epistemology, and that kept happening, and I was like, that doesn't sound very, convincing. But the more you look at it, it's kind of a humble response, and can be actually a really strong argument. So, the starting premise for this argument is that if a fact, E, that we observe stands in need of explanation, and hypothesis H provides a satisfactory explanation of E that is better than any other explanation available, then E provides significant evidential support for H. Okay, so if a fact, just calling that fact E to make it easy, stands in need of explanation. So, let's see. The universe, the fact that the universe exists, stands in need of explanation. And hypothesis H, which would be this cosmological fine-tuning argument, provides a satisfactory explanation of the fact that the universe exists. That is better than any alternative explanation available. Then the cosmological fine-tuning argument provides significant evidential support for the fact that the universe exists. It's kind of like plugging in our variables. And the book lays out this argument just boom, boom, boom. So, that our universe is hospitable to life stands in need of explanation. Then we move on to that God adjusted the constants in order to allow for life to develop provides a satisfactory explanation for why our universe is life permitting. So then, there is no comparably satisfying explanation of this fact available. Then we conclude, therefore, that our universe is life permitting provides significant evidential support for theism. So it's not saying this provides absolute evidential support for theism, but that it provides significant evidential support for theism. So, let's see. His big thing is that this argument doesn't prove that there is a God, but only that there is an evidential connection between certain facts and theism. So this is a fairly modest conclusion, as I said. So you could even say this isn't actually a proof for the existence of God, because it's not what he's attempting to do here. The main thing he's trying to do is establish that there's an evidential connection between the facts of the universe and theism. So, one thing that I thought was interesting was that he gives an example of if you, or if I, just dropped this cup on the floor with tea in it, or water, and it spilled just everywhere in no specific pattern, I would think, oh yeah, like, that's just something that happens. But if I spill it and it is a perfect ring, like perfect circle, like mathematically perfect circle. That would constitute a response. Like, I would want to figure out why that happened. Or if a bunch of alphabet tiles are scattered and they just say, like, A and O, K, W, whatever. Then I just think, oh, that's just like they fell that way, whatever. But he uses something from Hamlet, I think. If the letters fall and they say, oh, that this too solid flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew. If it said, like, that whole sentence, I would be like, what happened? Who did this? Like, I wouldn't just think, oh, those just fell. So some things require more of a response than other things. So if you look at the universe, it doesn't look like a big jumbled mess. It doesn't look like a random assortment of a bunch of things. Like, we actually have life. We can breathe. We can talk. We can do all these things. So that seems to require much more of a response than if everything was just jumbled and chaotic. And one way that someone might object to that would be to say, well, if you weren't alive, you wouldn't even have this thought of it being a significant thing to answer. But that doesn't really prove anything, like, according to Roger White. He says, yeah, I guess, but that's not much of an argument against what he's trying to say. So, something that's important to this argument is that the fine-tuning of our universe is thought to be extremely improbable. And so, like it's a, point something one chance that we exist at all. So that is something very improbable. And because of that, it demands an explanation. And this universe of life stands out specifically because it's valuable. There's meaning to it, at least to us. But, like, there's a lot going on with life. And so because of that, it stands out. Like I said, once again, demands a response. Now, this argument, he admits, is most vulnerable to premise 4. So we should go back and see that. Which is, there is no comparably satisfying explanation of this fact available. Because some people could say there is other satisfying explanations for life. That's where people are going to attack the argument the most. Because people won't argue as much that that the fact that our universe exists is in need of an explanation. People won't really attack that as much. Or premise 3, that God adjusted the constants in order to allow for life, provides a satisfactory explanation, because it does seem that would be a satisfactory explanation. The way that wouldn't be a satisfactory explanation would be if there was another explanation that did the job as well. So that's why number 4 is the premise that people tend to object to. So his conclusion, like, it almost seems like we're just reading somebody explaining the basics of an argument without actually arguing for it, because it's such a modest argument. He even ends by saying, I have hardly scratched the surface of the possible defenses, rebuttals, and replies concerning the premises of this argument, not to mention the other ways we might frame the whole issue, but I hope to have conveyed some of the intuitive force of the puzzle about fine-tuning as an argument for theism. The argument, I would suggest, carries considerable force, although the verdict may ultimately depend on the credibility of the multiverse hypothesis. So, the thing that this paper is trying to do is to explain that there is some intuitive force of this argument. So what I mean by that is we should consider intuitions. So let me give an example. Let's see. Intuitions in philosophy are important because they show us what the average person would think in a situation. So suppose that somebody stole $5 from Walmart or something. And then they get caught and they get put in prison for 30 years. My intuition, most people's intuition probably, is that doesn't seem right. That doesn't seem to be fair. I haven't done much thinking about it. I haven't developed a whole theory for why that's the case, but it just strikes me that that is not the right response. Now, if somebody steals $5 from Walmart and they get caught and they get told to pay it back and don't do that again, they get a warning, that intuitively to me sounds pretty right. That sounds about accurate. So a lot of philosophy that we do is based on intuition, and then we use evidence or facts or whatever it may be to prove that our intuition was actually correct. So intuition might seem like it doesn't matter that much, but it actually carries a bit of weight. Let's see. Oh, there's an argument sometimes that people make that we're just in, I mean, it's not an argument, but some people will be like, what if we're just in a simulation and none of this physical world actually exists? We're just a brain in a vat being stimulated with different stimuli. My personal intuition is that just doesn't seem true to me. There's pretty much no way I can prove that that's not true. There's pretty much no way anyone can prove that's not true. The most evidence that we have is intuition. Like, I really just don't feel like that's true. And sometimes intuition weighs more and sometimes it weighs less. Because let's see. Let me think of an example. There are some things that are just kind of right down the middle. Like, apart from this argument for cosmological fine-tuning or any of the arguments that we've discussed, if somebody just said, do you think God is real? Some would have the intuition, yes, I intuitively would say yes, without thinking too much about it. That seems right to me. And some people would say intuitively no. I haven't thought much about it, but it just doesn't seem the case to me. Not that that's like split right down the middle or anything, but something like that, intuition doesn't play such a big part because it's such a big, broad question. But something more specific, like this particular argument, saying it really seems like this would be the best inference or the best explanation in this scenario, that holds a little more weight because I think maybe specificity plays a part in it. So you can't always, for every argument, don't just appeal to your intuition, because it could totally be off and wrong. But in some cases, when there's not much else to appeal to, that's not a bad place to go. Like I said, for the brain in a vat scenario, that's about all you're going to get. I mean, people write a bunch of stuff on it, but I'm sure you don't believe that you don't actually exist, right? So some people might, that could be the case, but most people would say it really seems to me that I exist. So anyways, that's something to think about when thinking about the intuitive force of something. And that's all that Roger White is arguing for here. He's not saying that this is 100% true. He's just saying this argument does carry some weight. A lot of weight. Yeah. And then, let's see. One thing that you could think about for writing your paper is number 2 of the notes and questions. It says the scientific basis for the cosmological fine-tuning argument is controversial. The key premise is a claim about the fundamental laws of nature, but we do not know the fundamental laws, so any such claim is, at best, conjectural. And then it gives a paper that you could read if you were interested in that. So if you're interested in this cosmological fine-tuning argument, then that would be a great paper to write about. Or the first one on the notes and questions, you could explain why the cosmological fine-tuning argument isn't just another God of the gaps argument. So, like we said in the watchmaker argument, how it could be seen as another iteration of the God of the gaps, this too could be seen as that. A lot of arguments for the existence of God could just be seen as an iteration of the God of the gaps. So something to keep in mind. You could always write about that. That would be a great thing to do. So next week, we're going to be finishing out this first section, I believe. So, yeah. You'll read through page 62, write a critical summary for Tuesday, and it will be awesome. So, we get to talk about the problem of evil next week, which should be fun in some way. Yeah, so thanks for watching and listening. Thanks for being patient with me while I figure out the Blackboard and all of it, and I'm sorry that I still don't have it all figured out, but thanks for being patient, and yeah, good luck with everything. Let me know if you need anything, and well, I was going to say I'll see you Tuesday, but you'll see me Tuesday. I won't see you, so anyways, bye-bye.